Monday's Newsnight now on BBC Two with Kirsty Wark.
Putin's punishment, but is the signal that he'll stop at nothing. Ukraine suffers one of its worst nights since the invasion as more than 80 missiles rain down across the country. How should the West respond? Tonight we speak to the only Russian diplomat to have publicly resigned in protest at the war and a senior Ukrainian MP. And we're joined by a Ukrainian family, some of whom are here and the others in Kyiv. Also tonight, as Liz Truss tries out a charm offensive, the markets don't look like they're charmed. I'll be asking the former Treasury Minister, now Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, what she has to do. And Scotland's First Minister rallies her troops for independence.
Scotland has got what it takes to be a successful, independent country. It has it in abundance. Never let anyone tell us otherwise.
Could Nicola Sturgeon turn the general election vote into a legal road to independence? The party's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, is here to answer that. Good evening. Dnipro, Lviv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, towns many of us had never heard of this time last year, but are now so familiar, as well as the capital, Kyiv. Towns in all parts of Ukraine, all hit by multiple missiles last night. In retaliation, Putin said, for the attack on the bridge between Russia and Crimea. 11 died and dozens injured, and rockets hit schools, health centres, kindergartens and multiple apartment buildings. President Zelensky called on Liz Truss to lead the Western response, asking for protection of the skies and further isolation of Russia. And in the last few minutes, it's been announced that there'll be a virtual meeting of the G7 tomorrow, and the Prime Minister will call for a NATO meeting next. So have the attacks unfolded, and what will be the impact of the conflict? Tomorrow, the head of GCHQ is expected to say that Ukraine is turning the tide against exhausted Russian forces and will claim that despite the attacks, Moscow is running out of ammunition. Our defence editor Mark Urban is at the Newsnight wall. Mark.
Well, Kirsty, today we saw a large-scale attack intended, no doubt, to shock Ukrainians in Kyiv or Lviv, who'd got back to some sort of normality over the past 8 months. So we can see multiple attacks from multiple directions. Have a look at the map. Cruise missiles launched from bombers over Russia and from warships in the Black Sea. Some of them overflew Moldova and fired from the Caspian Sea too. It's reported also that Iranian-made drones may have been launched from Belarus. The targets right across Ukraine, from Lviv in the west to Zaporizhia in the southeast. There were infrastructure installations and symbolic places too, like the glass bridge in Kyiv. A playground and 2 university buildings were struck in the capital also. Odd as aiming points, but sometimes where a missile falls might not be the intended target. Only the firer knows where it was meant to go. But enough have hit purely civilian sites in the centre of Kyiv and other cities to be sure that a message was being sent. As for the Ukrainian defences, their chances depend on the speed and trajectory of the incoming missile. This footage is said to show a Ukrainian engaging a passing cruise missile. The head of the army there claimed that 43 out of 84 Russian missiles fired in were brought down. Now, that's a claim that has to be treated with a little scepticism given the size of the country and difficulty of downing these incoming threats. And inevitably, Ukrainian officials are now asking for more powerful air defence weapons from NATO. But Russia is also bringing in new weapons, including the Iranian-made Shahed drones used today and in other recent attacks on Ukraine. Not only that, but their stockpiles stockpiles of Russian-made missiles are not yet exhausted, even if Western intelligence estimates early on in the conflict suggested that they were running low quickly. The Kremlin then is showing emphatically that it still has the ability to up the pain level. But as to the point of that, when Ukrainians breathe defiance, well, that goes to the heart of the strategies being employed by the two sides.
Mark Urban will shortly be talking to a senior Ukrainian MP and a former Russian diplomat who resigned in protest at the war earlier this year. But joining me now is Yevgenia Lukash, who fled Kherson after heavy Russian bombing in April to get an MRI for her one-year-old daughter here in Britain. And we're also going to talk to her son Victor, a student still in Kyiv who she's not seen for 10 months, and Yevgenia's sister Marina. Thank you all for joining us. First of all, Yevgenia, how did you find out that your son Victor was alive this morning? Come out anyway at the moment. Thank you all very much indeed. Well, now I'm going to be joined by Boris Bondarov, a former Russian diplomat who resigned in May in protest at the war, and the Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko. Good evening, gentlemen both. First of all, just asking you, first of all, what you think happened last night, Oleksiy Goncharenko. Do you think it was simply to give you a great deal of punishment for the bridge, or do you think this is a new tactic? Thank you both very much indeed. Today, the First Minister of Scotland, the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, in an apparently off-the-cuff remark in her speech, brought the SNP conference to its feet in Aberdeen when she pledged to be First Minister for quite a while yet. This was a reassurance for the faithful that after 7 years in both jobs, her appetite for pursuing independence wasn't waning. The Supreme Court tomorrow begins considering her application for a legal referendum on independence, and she offered the date of October the 19th next year should the court rule in her favour. But in any event, she made it clear that in the next general election, a vote for the SNP will be set out clearly as a vote for independence. In her speech, she took aim, unusually, at Labour, reflecting its increased showing in the opinion polls at the Tories' expense. Our political editor, Nick Watt, reports from Aberdeen. Well, I'm joined now by the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford, thanks very much for coming in.
Good evening.
We'll talk about independence in a moment. Let's just talk briefly about your record. This year, poverty-related attainment gap between pupils in most and least deprived areas has grown wider since last year. And education is entirely in your own hands. Ian Blackford, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The mood music from Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss has gone from thrash metal to needy love song. Think Justin Bieber's Sorry, as they now try to woo backbenchers and some frontbenchers too, and the all-important markets. Today, the Bank of England said it would spend as much as $10 billion a day, doubling its self-imposed limit to hoover up gilts. And the Chancellor announced today that he is going to bring forward his plan for balancing the government's finances by a month to October the 31st. The Prime Minister is having lunches with as many backbenchers as she can manage, at which the question of raising working age benefits in line with inflation might just come up. So her spokesman said today Liz Truss was open-minded, and Greg Hands, a Sunak supporter, was brought in at trade to replace Conor Burns. But when the party and the parliamentarians are restive, when mortgage rates are going up and spending cuts are likely around the corner, does Liz Truss have any political capital to call on? I'm joined again by our political editor, Nick Watt. Nick, thanks very much, Nick. And the Treasury Select Committee Chair and former Treasury Minister, Mel Stride, joins me now. Good evening, thanks very much for coming in. A lot of developments against the background of real life problems, you know, credit card bills, rising mortgages. Kwasi Kwarteng, as you pressed him to do, has brought forward the fiscal reckoning, if you want to call it that, on the 31st of October. You've got James Bowler brought in as Permanent Secretary at Treasury, safe pair of hands rather than the disruptor that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss wanted. But the market still went in the wrong direction. Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's all from us now. I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, sleep well. Goodbye.
Hello there.
For most of you, it was a fine afternoon with plenty of sunshine around. In Derbyshire, we could see clear blue sunny skies here, but it wasn't quite as sunny everywhere.